A sharp cry cut through the mountain air just before sunrise. It did not come from a wolf, it came from a grown man. His boots slid across the frozen slope. Snow poured around his knees. Behind him, another man clawed at a buried sled while the wind swallowed every shouted word. The mountain showed no mercy. It only kept taking. Far above them, hidden behind a wall of rough gray stone, a young woman quietly placed another flat rock beside a small fire. She was 17. Her hands were wrapped in strips of burlap. Blood had dried beneath the cloth days ago. She paused only long enough to listen. Then she went back to her work, because every stone on this mountain carried a reason. And every reason began long before that first desperate cry. Down in the valley, a village was dying. Roofs cracked under the weight of snow. Children shook beneath thin blankets. Men who had once laughed at her walked from house to house, counting the dead. And she knew. She could hear it in the wind. But she did not come down. Not yet. Her mother had a name for girls like her. Girls who kept walking after the world had asked them to stop. Her mother had called them stone-hearted. Her mother had meant it as praise. Stay with her. Every stone matters. 7 years earlier, a different kind of morning. Iron Hollow, Wyoming territory was small enough that everyone knew whose smoke rose first each dawn. In summer, the mountains held the town like cupped hands. In winter, those same hands closed. Ada was 10, barefoot on a wooden porch. Late spring, the air still cold enough to see her breath. Inside the cabin, her mother stirred oats over the fire. Her father was outside splitting cedar. Each strike of the axe rang out like a slow, steady heartbeat. And then a small figure appeared on the road. An old woman, gray shawl, basket over one arm, walking without hurry. "Delia's coming," Ada shouted through the door. Her mother laughed. "Well, put shoes on, child." Ada didn't. She ran down the path. Cordelia Ashford was 61 that year. She was not Ada's blood. She was more. She had helped birth Ada into this world on a snowy February night. She had held Ada's mother's hand when Ada's mother was too tired to hold her own child. She was called Delia by everyone, and she called Ada my girl. That morning, Delia sat on the porch with her knitting. Ada sat beside her on a wooden crate. The needles clicked. The axe rang out. The oats simmered. Delia looked down at her. "Girl," she said, "I want you to remember something." "Yes, ma'am." "When you lose everything." Delia paused. Her voice softened. "Your hands will still belong to you. Your hands never betray you." Ada didn't understand yet. Not really. She only nodded because Delia had said it. And Delia never wasted words. Behind them, her father brought a log down clean with one strike. Her mother laughed at something inside the cabin. The whole world smelled of cedar smoke and wet grass. Ada did not know that this was one of the last mornings her family would ever have all together. Ada was 14 when her father died. He was clearing a widowmaker off the edge of the North Ridge. A hanging limb, half broken, the kind a good woodsman knew to leave alone in wet weather. But snow had come early that October, and the widow's roof needed the wood. The limb broke wrong. It caught him across the chest. They brought him home in a wagon. Delia was already there when they arrived. She had felt it. She could not explain how. She only said, "Ruth, I dreamed of your husband last night. He was walking away from me." Ruth Whitfield did not scream when they carried him in. She only knelt beside the wagon, placed one hand on his still chest, and said quietly, "Oh, my love." Ada watched from the doorway. Her father had carved marks on that doorway. One every birthday since she was 5. She counted them without meaning to. 9 marks, 9 years. There would be more marks, but no more from him. Delia stayed with them for 2 full weeks. She cooked, she swept, she sat with Ruth in the long, silent evenings. She braided Ada's hair when Ada could not lift her own arms to do it. At the end of those 2 weeks, Delia said, "I'll come every Sunday, my girl. I'll come as long as I'm walking." She kept that promise. Ada was almost 16 when her mother started coughing. At first, it seemed like nothing, a winter cold. But by spring, the cough had teeth in it. By summer, there was blood in her handkerchief. By fall, Ruth could not walk from the bed to the kitchen without stopping to lean on the wall. Consumption. That was the word the town used. Delia moved in. Not officially. She still had her own little house at the edge of town. But she was at Ada's every morning before the sun. She left every night after Ruth was asleep. Ada learned to boil broth, to wring cloths in vinegar water, to press her mother's hand and say, "I'm here, Mama." She was 15. She was already becoming someone else. And then one Tuesday evening in November, the door opened without a knock. Josiah Marlowe stepped inside. I was 58 that year, broad-shouldered, silver-bearded, a man used to being obeyed, head of the Iron Hollow Settlement Council, owner of the largest herd in the valley, cousin somehow to nearly every family in town. He removed his hat. He nodded at Delia. He walked past her as if she were furniture. Ruth. Ruth turned her head on the pillow. Josiah. I've brought papers. Delia stood up. Not now. Josiah did not look at her. Woman, sit down. Not now. He turned then, slowly, and the look he gave Delia was the look a man gives a fly he cannot quite reach. Cordelia Ashford, he said, you are a guest in this house. So am I. Only Ruth may ask me to leave. Delia's jaw locked. She did not sit, but she did not speak again either. Josiah spread the papers on the quilt. He explained gently, as if to a child. The land west of the cabin, the good pasture, the little well, just those pieces, a fair price, enough to leave Ada with something when the time came. Ruth looked at the papers, then at Ada, then at Delia. No, she said to Ruth. No, Josiah. He waited. He was patient. He had all the time in the world. She did not. Think about the girl, he said. Think about what she'll have when you're gone. Ruth's voice was very small, but it was iron. She'll have what I leave her, not what you take. Josiah stared at her for a long moment. Then he folded the papers, slowly, carefully, as if he were folding a napkin at supper. You'll think about it, he said. There's still time. There wasn't, but he said it anyway. He left without saying goodbye. 3 nights later, Ruth called Delia to her bedside. Ada was in the kitchen dropping herbs into hot water. Her hands smelled of thyme. Delia, Ruth whispered. The box, under the loose floor, by the fire. Delia knelt, her old knees cracked. She pried up the board, a small wooden box, cedar, latched. Take it, Ruth said. Keep it. Not for now. Delia's eyes filled. Ruth, please. Listen to me. She's not ready. She'll be angry first, then broken, then something else. Only when she becomes that something else, only then. How will I know? You'll know because she'll be more like her father than her mother by then. Delia held the box against her chest. Ruth, promise me, Cordelia. I promise. God help me. I promise. Ruth closed her eyes. Good, she said. Now go tell my girl I want to see her. Ada came in from the kitchen with steaming tea. She would remember for the rest of her life that her mother smiled at her that night. Really smiled. A tired, honest mother smile. Ruth Whitfield died 2 hours before dawn. Ada was almost 16. The town came. They always came. They brought bread. They brought quilts. They stood in her kitchen and said the words people say. So sorry, honey. Your mother was a fine woman. You call if you need anything. They meant it, some of them. But then the days passed, and the bread stopped coming, and the quilt stayed on the bed, and Ada was alone in a cabin with a father-shaped hole in one wall and a mother-shaped hole in the other. The town did not take her in. Not officially, not through the council, not through the church. There were meetings. Ada heard about them later. There were long discussions about the Whitfield situation. There were opinions, there were prayers, but no family came forward because no family wanted the questions. Because Josiah Marlowe was on the council, and Josiah Marlowe had made it quietly known that the Whitfield girl was difficult, that she took after her mother's stubbornness, that she would be better off learning to stand on her own. So they let her stand. Almost 16, alone. Delia came every Sunday. She brought soap, she brought bread, she brought skeins of dyed wool, and taught Ada to knit socks. Ada sold the socks in the general store. Sometimes she made 6 cents, sometimes 10. She cleaned houses. She milked the Peterson cow. She weeded the churchyard on Saturdays. She ate what she could grow and what she could earn. She kept her face still in public, every single time. At night, sometimes she pressed her face into her mother's shawl and made no sound at all. She grew taller. Her hands hardened. Her jaw set differently. Delia watched her week after week and thought, there she is, there's her father, coming through the grief like a slow, slow river. Delia touched the cedar box every night before bed. Not yet, not yet. Nearly 2 years passed. Ada turned 16. Then she was almost 17. Winter 1889. She had learned every board in that little cabin, every draft, every crack that whistled in wind. She had learned which stove log burned hottest. She had learned to stretch a pound of salt pork across 10 days. She had not learned to be soft again. Delia noticed. Delia said nothing. Josiah Marlowe noticed too. And Josiah decided the time was right. The morning it happened, Ada was splitting kindling behind the cabin. She heard footsteps in the frost. Ezra Marlowe came around the corner of the house first. He was 30, broad, his father's build, but not his father's eyes. His eyes had always been softer. Right now, they were something worse than soft. They were guilty. Behind him was his young wife, Ruth Marlowe. Ada always found it strange that her mother's name was now the name of the woman who would live in her mother's kitchen. Ruth Marlowe was 28, round with child, 6 months along, maybe 7. She kept one hand on her belly and would not meet Ada's eyes. Behind them both was Josiah, and behind Josiah was half the town. Ada set down the axe. She did not run inside. She did not put on her coat. She stood in the frost in her thin dress and looked at them. Ada, said Josiah. Mr. Marlowe, there's been a council decision. I don't recall being called to a council. He almost smiled. He didn't, quite. You wouldn't have been. It concerns the property. Delia was there, somewhere in the back of the crowd. Ada could not see her, but she knew Delia was there, because she felt it, like a hand on her shoulder from 20 feet away. Josiah unfolded a paper. He read. Ada didn't listen to the words. She listened to the pauses between the words. She listened to the way the townspeople shifted their boots and would not look at her. She listened to the wind in the pines, which was leaning east that morning, which meant a storm. Transferred to Ezra Marlowe and his wife, Josiah finished. Effective immediately. The crowd said nothing. Ada said, what may I take? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. Josiah didn't lift his eyes from the paper. Whatever you can carry, no more, no less. Ada nodded once. She turned. She walked to the cabin door. She went inside alone. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke and dried apples. Morning light stretched across the floor exactly the way it had every winter since she could remember. She stood in the doorway. She let herself look. Just once. Her father's rocking chair, her mother's kettle, the braided rug her grandmother had made, the clock that no longer worked. She rested one hand against the doorframe. The marks were still there, 9 from her father, and after that her own. She had kept the tradition. She had cut a small notch every birthday since, 14, 15, 16. She traced the 16 with her fingertip. Then she moved, quickly, a thick wool blanket, rolled tight, a small sack of oats, 3 potatoes, half a jar of pork fat, a tin cup, a skinning knife with a cracked wooden handle, her father's flint striker, cold in her palm, his old rifle. There were no cartridges. There hadn't been for 2 years. But the rifle still looked like a rifle, and people who see a rifle rarely stop to ask if it is loaded. She paused at the fireplace, because she had remembered something. Her mother near the end had said once, there's a loose stone behind the hearth, buttons, letters, small things. Ada had never checked. It had felt like trespassing on her mother's private life. But now the cabin was not hers, and whatever her mother had left, there was hers to take. She knelt. She pushed at the stones one by one. The third stone shifted. She pulled it free. Inside the small hollow behind it was a folded paper, yellowed, old. She opened it, and she stopped breathing, because it was a transfer deed for the entire property, not just the west pasture, the cabin, the land, the well, everything. The name at the bottom was Ezra Marlowe. The date at the top was more than 8 months before her mother died. Only one signature was missing, her mother's. Ada stared at the paper for a long time. Something inside her went very quiet, very cold, very still, because she understood now why her mother had died. Not from the sickness alone, from the pressure, from the visits, from the papers pushed across the quilt while she was too weak to lift her head, from the slow, patient, unrelenting siege of a man who knew he had all the time in the world. Because she didn't, Ada folded the paper. She tucked it inside her dress, against her ribs. She did not know yet what she would do with it. She only knew nobody outside would see it, not today. When she stepped back onto the porch, the whole town was still watching. She had her blanket roll on her back, the rifle across her shoulder, the tin cup tied to her belt. She looked at Ezra Marlowe. He did not look back. She looked at Ruth Marlowe, who was weeping without sound, one hand on her belly. She looked at Josiah. Josiah looked at her. And in that look, she understood something else. He knew. He knew she had found something in that cabin. He didn't know what, but he knew. And he wasn't afraid, because who would believe an orphan girl? That was the moment, that precise moment, when Ada Whitfield stopped being a child. She walked past all of them. She did not say goodbye. At the edge of the crowd, she finally saw Delia. The old woman's eyes were wet. Her mouth was pressed thin. She was clutching her shawl at her throat with one shaking hand. Ada slowed, just slightly. Their eyes met. Delia did not speak. She only nodded. Once. Very slowly. Ada nodded back. Then she kept walking. Down the frozen road. Past the last house. Past the last fence. Toward the ridge. Nobody followed her. 2 miles out of Iron Hollow, the road split. One trail dropped south into the lower valley. There were larger towns down there. Strangers. Maybe work. Maybe a bed in someone's kitchen. Maybe a marriage to a man twice her age who needed a wife more than he needed a companion. The other trail climbed, up into the pine timber, up toward Broken Ridge, where hunters didn't go once the first heavy snow fell. Too many cliffs, and too much wind, and too few ways home. Ada sat on a split fence rail. Frost bit through her dress. She let herself remember her father's voice, just one sentence. He had said it while mending a saddle. She had been maybe 8. If you ever lose everything, my girl, go where the land still tells the truth. She closed her eyes. Down in the valley, people lied. They lied with silence. They lied with folded papers. They lied with council votes and gentle sermons about God's plan for the weak. Up on the mountain, the wind did not lie. The stone did not lie. The cold did not pretend to be anything but what it was. She opened her eyes. She turned uphill. The climb took nearly 3 hours. The trail vanished under old snow before the first hour was out. She followed her father's rule instead. Never look for shelter first. Look for water. Shelter waits near water. Her shoulders burned. The cold cut her throat. She stopped only twice. Once to tighten the strap of the blanket roll. Once because she thought she heard something behind her. She turned, listened. Nothing. She kept climbing. Near midday, she noticed something. 2 pine trees, leaning toward each other. The ground beneath them held less snow than the ground around them. Dark moss on the exposed stone. Moisture, hidden water, right there. She pushed through the low branches, and the mountain opened. A shallow rock hollow beneath an overhang. Deep enough to stand in at the entrance. Deep enough to lie down at the back. Dry ground, solid stone roof, no animal sign, and the wind. The wind stopped. The moment she stepped inside, the wind stopped. Ada slowly lowered her bundle. She listened. Nothing. No howl, no creak of pine, just her own breath. She pressed one bare hand against the limestone wall. Dry, cold, strong. She sat down, for the first time since leaving the cabin. She sat down on solid stone, and she let her shoulders drop. Outside, snow drifted between the pines. She whispered to nobody the only words she had said aloud all day. I'll make this enough. Then she reached for the first stone. She had no way of knowing. But down in the valley, a small cedar box sat on a shelf in a small house at the edge of town. It had sat there for nearly 2 years. Waiting, that night Delia Ashford took it down. She held it in both hands. She sat with it in her lap by the fire. She did not open it. She had promised she would not open it. But she looked at it, and she whispered, Ruth, I think it's beginning. She placed the box back on the shelf. She banked the fire. She checked the door twice. She lay down in the dark. She did not sleep, because she was waiting for something. She just didn't know what yet. Ada's first night, she struck the flint. The first spark died. The second did nothing. The third caught a curl of dry pine bark, a tiny flame. She fed it thin twigs the way her father had taught her. Small, then medium, then a single split log she had dragged in from a dead pine near the entrance. Warmth, a small circle of it. She took one potato from the sack. She held it a long time. Then she broke it in half. She wrapped one half in cloth, set it aside, cooked the other half in the coals. She ate slowly, one bite, a long pause, another bite, thinking about tomorrow before finishing today. That was how her father had survived hard winters. That was how she would survive this one. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. She sat with her back against the rear wall of the hollow. She listened to the wind pass over the mountain high above her. She thought about her mother. She thought about the paper against her ribs. She thought about Josiah Marlowe's face. Calm, patient, unafraid. She thought about Ezra Marlowe's hands, trembling as he held those false papers in the frost. And she thought about Delia, the one nod, the wet eyes, the pressed lips. She whispered into the dark, Delia, whatever you know, whatever you're keeping, I'm going to make it worth keeping. The fire snapped. Ada closed her eyes and slept badly and briefly and alone. Down in the valley in a cabin that had once been hers, Ezra Marlowe could not sleep either. He sat at his father's old table. He was drinking watered whiskey. His wife had gone to bed hours ago, weeping quietly into the pillow that had belonged to Ruth Whitfield. Ezra stared at the fire. He kept thinking about the door frame, about the marks, 9 from a dead father, 3 more from a daughter who had kept the tradition alone. He thought, I am living in a place I should not be living in. I thought my unborn child will grow up on stolen ground. He set down the whiskey. He walked slowly to the kitchen. He opened the old drawer beneath the bread box, the one that always stuck. He rummaged through it. Nothing. Old receipts, a broken pencil, a rusted hairpin. He was about to close it. Then he saw the corner of something. Behind the drawer, wedged. He pulled the drawer all the way out. A folded letter, yellowed, sealed, his name on it, in a woman's handwriting. His hand shook when he broke the seal. Ezra, it began. He read it in the firelight, standing in his stocking feet, his breath fogging in the cold kitchen. He read it twice, then he sat down on the floor, right there, with his back against the cabinet, and he wept, a grown man of 30, alone in a stolen kitchen. He wept without making a sound. 2 days later, Delia went to the parsonage. Reverend Obadiah Fenn opened the door in his shirt sleeves. He was 50, thin, tired-looking. He had been reading his Bible at the table. Cordelia, Reverend, come in, please. She came in, she sat. She did not remove her shawl. Obadiah, she said, I need to know something. Yes. How much longer are you willing to be Josiah Marlowe's dog? The Reverend's face went white, then red, then still. He set his Bible down. That is a hard word, Cordelia. Yes, it is. You've known me 30 years. Yes, I have. Then you know I have not always been strong. No, you haven't. A long silence. Then Fenn said quietly, what do you have, a box? From Ruth Whitfield, before she died. Fenn closed his eyes. Cordelia, do you know what's in it? No, she made me promise not to open it. Then how do you know it's what we need? Delia looked at him. Because Ruth Whitfield never wasted anything in her life. Not thread, not bread, not words, not a cedar box. Fenn breathed out slowly. When not yet. The girl is up on the mountain. She has to become who she's going to be first. Ruth said so. And how long does that take? Delia looked toward the window, toward the mountain, barely visible through the thin curtain. I don't know, she said, but the winter is coming, and I think the winter is going to help. Down in the valley in a small stone house, an old woman put a cedar box back on a shelf. Up on the mountain, a young woman reached for another stone. Neither of them knew that between them the whole story was already turning. The wall took her 4 tries. The first try fell before sundown on day 2. She had stacked the stones too fast, too proud. The cold had made her stupid. She had thought, I'm strong, I can do this in one afternoon. She could not. The wall fell inward. One of the heaviest stones caught the edge of her boot. She limped for 3 days after. She sat on the frozen ground, looked at the pile of scattered stones, and laughed. Once, a short dry laugh with no joy in it. All right, she said to the mountain, I hear you. Then she started again. The second try she built too narrow. The wind pushed it over in the night. The third try she built too wide. Ran out of good flat stones halfway. The fourth try she did it right. She scratched shallow grooves into the frozen ground with her knife. She set the base stones inside those grooves. Not on top of the surface, inside it, so the ground itself held them. She chose flat stones. She was turned them until they lay true. She packed frozen mud between every gap. She scraped moss from the north side of a fallen log and pressed it into the seams. The wall grew slowly. Her hands bled through 3 layers of burlap. She wrapped them again. She kept working. By the fifth day, the wall stood at her shoulder, 3 courses thick at the base, 2 at the top, a narrow gap on one side for the door, a gap at the top for smoke. She stepped inside. She sat against the rear stone. She waited. The wind still came into the hollow, but it no longer poured across the floor. It rose, it climbed over the stone. It slipped out through the top gap. The air around her legs went still. Not warm, just still. She pressed her palm against the finished wall. She whispered, "All right, Papa, all right." Then she added one more stone before dark. Down in the valley, Ezra Marlowe could not stop reading the letter. He kept it folded inside his coat, against his chest. He read it every night after Ruth slept. He read it in the barn. He read it once in the outhouse in the dark because the words were burning holes in his ribs. The letter said this: Ezra, your father is coming to my door with papers. He is polite. He is patient. He is a wolf in a good coat. I am too weak to fight him much longer. If you are the man I always thought you were, please stop this. My girl has already lost her father. Do not let her lose the only thing he built for her. Ruth Whitfield. Ezra read it. Ezra read it. Ezra read it. He thought, I could have. He thought, I did not. He thought, she wrote to me and I never came. He did not sleep. His wife noticed. She said nothing, because his wife was not stupid, because Ruth Marlowe had also read the letter. Once, when Ezra was in the barn, she had found it in his coat, and she had read it, and she had put it back exactly the way she found it. She had not told him she read it. She was waiting for him to become the man she had married. Josiah noticed something too. Josiah Marlowe was 58, and he had not become the richest man in Iron Hollow by being blind. He watched his son at Sunday dinner. He watched Ezra's hands shake when Ezra reached for the salt. He watched Ezra's eyes not meet his. He set down his fork. Son, sir, you are troubled. No, sir. Do not lie to your father. Ezra's jaw tightened. Ruth Marlowe, sitting across the table, quietly cut her bread and did not look up. The Whitfield girl is on my mind, Ezra said, which was true, which was also nothing close to the whole truth. Josiah nodded slowly. Cold as it is up there, Josiah said. She won't last the season. No, sir. When she comes down, she'll come to town, she'll cause talk. Yes, sir. I've asked Hollis to keep an eye on the mountain. Ezra's head came up. Hollis. Yes. Hollis Reed, 35, iron-jawed, a man who did unpleasant things quietly and was paid well for it. He worked cattle for Josiah in summer. He worked other things in winter. Ezra swallowed up. Sir, she is only a girl. Josiah looked at his son for a long moment. Son, he said, the world does not care whether she is a girl. He returned to his supper. Ruth Marlowe did not look up, but her hand had gone very still on the bread knife. Ada felt him before she saw him. Not in a mystical way, in a hunter's way. Her father had taught her. She had been 3 weeks on the mountain. 3 weeks of routine. Wake before dawn, bank the fire, check the small snares, gather wood, improve the wall, melt snow for water, cook, sleep. She knew her ridge now. She knew which pine dropped needles first in wind. She knew where the raven's nest was. She knew the sound of her own boots on her own ground. She heard a boot that was not hers. She was on the slope above the hollow, gathering dry moss. She froze. She did not turn. She listened. A slow crunch behind the pines, uphill of her, not close, but close enough, watching. Ada did not move for a long minute. Then she stood slowly. She brushed her hands on her dress. She whistled once low, as if she were calling a dog she did not own. She walked back to the hollow, casual, slow, as if she had heard nothing. She went inside. She reached for her father's rifle. She sat with it across her knees, facing the entrance. She waited. Nothing came. At sundown, she went outside and studied the ground where she had heard the boot. She found the print, one clear one, in a patch of soft snow beneath a pine. A man's boot, large, deep tread, new leather, not Ezra's. She had seen Ezra's tracks in the frost the day he came. Ezra's boots were old, worn on the outside of the heel. This was somebody else. She looked out, across the ridge, toward the invisible town far below. She said quietly, so, just that. So, she walked back to the hollow. She built her fire small. She placed her rifle beside her bedroll. She slept lightly. The next morning, she discovered the hot stones, not by trying, by accident. She had cooked her potato the night before. She had gone to sleep with slate slabs still lying in the coals. She had forgotten to move them. At dawn, she was sitting up, rubbing her cold hands, and her boot brushed one of the slabs. It was warm, not hot, but warm, hours after the fire had died. Ada stared at it. Then she picked it up. Carefully, with the edge of her blanket, she held it against her stomach. She closed her eyes because warmth, real warmth, was such a rare thing now that even a warm rock made her chest ache. She thought. She thought about her father, who had once told her that stones near a hearth stay warm long after the fire is gone. She thought about her mother, who had once wrapped a hot brick in flannel and slipped it under Ada's blanket on a fever night. That evening, she placed 4 flat slate stones directly into the fire. She let them cook, slowly, deep in the coals. When the fire burned low, she rolled the stones out with 2 sticks. She let them cool just enough to touch. She wrapped each one in scraps of burlap. She slid them beneath her bed of pine boughs and dried moss. Then she lay down on top, warmth rising through the moss, not for a minute, for hours. Ada slept nearly 6 hours that night. She had not slept 6 hours since her mother died. When she woke, she pressed both hands against the stones, still faintly warm. She whispered, "Thank you, Papa." The wind above the ridge answered nothing, but something in her felt heard. The moss she found by accident, too. She had been gathering firewood behind a rock ledge. Sunlight didn't reach there. It was damp, cold. She noticed the moss because she almost slipped on it, a thick, springy carpet of green. Under her hand, it bounced back. It did not flatten. She dug her fingers into it, deep, nearly 6 inches, air, trapped air. She had grown up hearing her father say, "It's not cold that kills my girl. It's the ground. Ground steals warmth faster than wind." She carried armful after armful of moss back to the hollow. She spread it in the corner farthest from the entrance. She smoothed it. She stacked pine boughs over it, then her blanket over that. That night, she was not lying on stone anymore. She was lying on trapped air. The difference surprised her. She had not known such a small thing could matter so much. She thought about the people in town, sleeping on their wooden floors, above frozen earth, losing heat every hour to the ground beneath them. She thought, they don't know. She thought they could know if somebody told them. And then she thought, almost sharp, almost angry, why would I tell them? She rolled over. She pressed her cheek into the moss. She fell asleep before she could answer her own question. Delia sat by her fire that night with the cedar box in her lap. She was 68 years old. Her back ached. Her eyes were tired. She thought about Ruth, her friend of 40 years, the friend who had held her hand at the funeral of her own husband back in 1874, the friend who had walked with her through every hard winter since. She thought about Ruth's daughter, alone, on the mountain, in this cold. She thought, am I doing right by both of them? She thought, or am I just an old woman too afraid to move too soon? She did not know. She placed the box back on the shelf. She went to bed. She dreamed of Ruth. In the dream, Ruth was young, not sick, standing in a summer field. Her hair was loose. She was laughing. She said, Cordelia, wait for the storm. The storm will do the work. Delia woke in the dark. She sat up. Outside her window, the pines were leaning east, the way they lean before a storm. She whispered, Ruth, is it now? The wind pressed against her shutters. Delia said, all right then. She got up. She dressed. She banked her fire. She sat by the window until dawn, waiting. The storm came before sunrise, not the light snow that drifted quietly across the ridge every morning. This snow came sideways. The wind hit Ada's stone walls so hard, the loose flakes shot through the top gap like handfuls of salt. She fed the fire. Then again, she checked her water. Full. Outside, the mountain vanished behind a white curtain. She could not see her own woodpile 10 feet from the entrance. Inside, every sound became bigger. Every crackle from the fire, every settle of the coals, every push of wind against the wall. The wall held. Ada sat with her back against the rear stone. She wrapped her blanket around her knees. She whispered, all right, come on then. The storm came for a day, then 2, then 3. By the 3rd day, Ada realized something new. The smoke was not going straight up anymore. It curled under the low stone roof. It slid sideways. It found the top gap and slipped out. but it was leaving a trail of warm air behind. Warm air always climbed first. Cold air stayed near the floor. She watched the smoke for a long time. Then she picked up a flat stone, and another, and another. By midnight, she had built a small, curved shield behind the fire. A little wall of stone, angled, aimed back toward her bed. The heat from the fire hit that curve and bounced. Instead of climbing uselessly to the ceiling, part of it rolled back toward her. Within an hour, her blanket was warmer. The stones beneath the moss held their heat longer. Ada sat up. She stared at the little curved shield. She said out loud, "I made that." She said it again. "I made that." She had not felt proud of anything in 2 years. She felt proud now. She lay down. She slept. The storm kept howling, but she slept. Down in Iron Hollow on that same third day, the first person died. Old Mrs. Ainsley, 82, she lived alone in a small house at the north edge of town. Her son had promised to check on her. He had gotten trapped in the storm halfway there on. He had turned back. She died in her rocking chair, wrapped in 3 quilts, her Bible open on her lap. They found her when the storm broke briefly on day 4. The church bell rang once. People stood in their doorways, listening. Then the bell rang again. Then a third time. By the end of day 4, the toll was 3. Old Mrs. Ainsley, a middle-aged man named Coates who had died trying to save his cattle, and a widow named Winifred Bell who had had weak lungs for years. Josiah Marlowe stood in the church that Sunday and said, "This is a hard winter. This is God's testing us. We must endure." Reverend Fenn stood at the pulpit, silent. He did not agree with Josiah. He did not disagree either. He just stared at the front pew where 3 empty seats now sat. Delia was watching him from the... Their eyes met. She thought, "Come on, Obadiah, say it." He did not. Not yet. The storm eased on day 5, not stopped, just eased. Ezra Marlowe came out of his cabin to shovel the doorway. Snow was up to his chest. His barn had lost a corner of the roof. 2 of his sheep were dead. He shoveled until his back gave out. He went inside. His wife handed him hot water. He drank it standing at the door. Then he looked at her. She was holding her belly, but she was looking straight at him. "Ezra," she said. "Yes." "How much longer?" "How much longer what?" "How much longer are you going to sit in this house that isn't ours?" He closed his eyes. She went on, not loud, not angry, just clear. "I read the letter, Ezra." His eyes opened. "You. In your coat. Weeks ago, I read it. Ruth, that girl is up on a mountain, in this, and we are down here, in her mother's kitchen. Ruth, I don't know what to." "You do." She set down the cup. She walked to him. She took his hand and put it on her belly. "This child," she said, "is going to grow up somewhere, and I need to know what kind of house that will be." Ezra stared at her. His hands shook against her belly. He said, "Give me one day." She said, "You have one day." That night, Delia opened her front door in the dark. Ezra Marlowe stood on her step, snow in his beard, his hat crushed in one hand. She said, "About time." He said, "Ma'am." She said, "Come in before you freeze." He came in. She sat him at her table. She gave him hot coffee. She did not speak while he warmed his hands. Finally, he said, "Miss Ashford, my mother has been dead 9 years, and I still call every woman I respect ma'am. So please forgive that first." Delia almost smiled. "Say what you came to say, son." He drew a slow breath. "I need to know," he said, "if there is a way to make this right." "For who?" "For her. For Ada." Delia looked at him for a long time. Then she stood up. She went to the shelf. She took down the cedar box. She placed it in front of him on the table. "This," she said, "belonged to her mother." Ezra stared at it. "What's inside?" "I don't know. I promised not to open it." "Then how do you know?" "Because Ruth Whitfield never wasted a thing. Not thread, not bread, not a cedar box." Ezra reached out. He touched the top of the box with one finger. "Delia said the key is not with me." "Where is it?" "Ruth hid it somewhere in her house. She told me once, a long time ago. I've forgotten the exact place. But Ada will know. Ada grew up in that house." Ezra was very still. "You want me to bring this box up the mountain?" "Yes." "To her?" "Yes." "In this weather?" "Yes." He swallowed. "Miss Ashford, I could die on that mountain." Delia looked at him steadily. Son," she said, "if you don't take that box up there, some part of you will die down here. and that death will last a lot longer. Ezra stared at the box. Then he stared at his own trembling hand. Then he said, all right. Delia nodded. Tomorrow at first light, she said. I'll walk with you to the base of the trail. I can't climb it. My knees won't do it, but I'll walk you that far. Yes, ma'am. And Ezra, ma'am, when you give her that box, you look her in the eye. You do not flinch. You do not apologize. You do not explain. You just give it to her. Yes, ma'am, because that girl has had enough explanations. Ezra's eyes filled. Yes, ma'am. Delia turned to bank the fire. Her hands were shaking too. She hoped he didn't see. At the same hour, miles across town, in a large house with a large fire, Josiah Marlowe was standing at his front window. He had watched his son leave in the storm. He knew where Ezra was going. He had watched him turn onto the road that led to Cordelia Ashford's little house. Josiah stood very still. Then he turned. He walked to his desk. He wrote a short note. He folded it. He rang the small bell on the mantel. Hollis Reed came in from the kitchen. Frost still in his beard. He had been running the barn. Sir, Josiah handed him the note. Tomorrow, my son will go up the mountain. Sir, he may be carrying something from Ashford. Sir, I want you to be up there first. Hollis read the note. His face did not change. You want the box. I want the box. And the girl, Josiah did not answer for a moment. Then he said, do not harm her. Hollis waited. Josiah said, yet. Hollis nodded once. He put the note into the fire. He watched it burn. He walked out into the storm. Ada woke on the 6th morning of the storm. The wind had eased overnight. Not gone, just quieter. She stepped outside her wall. The world was buried. Snow up to her thighs where it had not drifted, up to her shoulders where it had. She looked down toward the valley. Only 3 thin columns of smoke, where before there had been 30. She stared for a long time. She thought, something is wrong down there. She turned back to her hollow. Her fire was still burning. Her stones were still warm. Her walls still held. She stood at the entrance. She looked at the small home she had built with her own bloody hands. She looked back down at the valley. She said aloud, I do not owe them a thing. She said it again. I do not owe them a single thing. She went inside. She sat down. She ate a piece of dried meat. She was still angry. She was still right, but she was already deciding. She just didn't know it yet. Ezra started up the mountain at first light on day 7. The storm had thinned to a steady snowfall, not vicious, just endless. He carried the cedar box wrapped in oiled canvas, inside his coat, against his ribs. Delia walked with him to the base of the ridge. She stopped there. She placed her old hand on his arm. Ezra, ma'am, if you don't come back. Yes, ma'am. I'll tell your wife you died a good man. His eyes filled. He turned. He climbed. Hollis was already ahead of him, an hour ahead. He had left before dawn. He was working his way up the ridge through a different route, a hunter's trail. He knew Broken Ridge better than Ezra. He would arrive first. He was at that very moment less than 300 yards from Ada's stone wall. Ada was outside gathering wood. She had her rifle across her back. She had made a habit of that after the first boot print. She was bending to lift a fallen branch when she heard something. Not a boot this time. A cough, a man's cough, muffled, but close. She straightened slowly. She turned her head slowly. She did not see him, but she smelled him. Sweat, wet wool, tobacco, a stranger, on her mountain. Ada slid the rifle off her shoulder. She kept it low, against her leg. She moved, not toward the sound, away from it, back toward her wall. Behind her in the pines a shape shifted. A tall man, bearded, in a heavy coat. He watched her go. He did not follow, not yet. He was waiting for something. Ada reached the wall. She ducked inside. She sat with her back against the rear stone, rifle across her lap. Her heart was pounding. She whispered, so he sent someone. She whispered, all right. She reached into her dress. She pulled out the folded paper she had carried against her ribs for 7 weeks. The false deed, the one with Ezra's name and no signature at the bottom. She stared at it. She thought, if I die up here, this paper dies with me, and nothing changes. She thought, I need someone to know. She thought, but who? She thought, there is no one. Except there was one. Delia would know. But Delia was down there, and she was up here. And there was a man in the pines. She heard faintly from far below the crunch of a second set of boots on the trail. Coming up, slower than the first man's, different rhythm. She lifted her head. She listened. Two men now, on her mountain, coming from different directions. Ada tightened her grip on the rifle. She whispered to herself, whatever comes next. Her voice broke a little. Whatever comes next, I am not the girl who left that cabin. She stood up. She stepped to the entrance of her wall, and she waited. Ada stood at the entrance of her wall, rifle in her hands, no cartridges in it, never had been. Not that anyone else knew. The first man came out of the pines from her right. Tall, beard iced over, coat too heavy for climbing, face like weather-beaten leather. She had never seen him before. But she knew the type, because she had seen her father's friends. And this man was not that. He stopped 10 feet from her wall. He said, Miss Whitfield. She said, Mr. Hollis Reed. That name means something to me. Works for Josiah Marlowe. Ah, just that. Ah, her voice was flat. Her hands were steady. She surprised herself. Hollis nodded at the rifle. That loaded. Come find out. He almost smiled. Almost. He said, Mr. Marlowe has been generous with me. I don't intend to hurt you. That's a comfort. He only wants a box. Ada's stomach turned to ice. She did not move her face. She said, what box? The one his son is bringing up this mountain. Silence. Ada thought, Ezra's coming. Ada thought, Ezra's coming with something. Ada thought, and this one is here to take it. She said, I don't know anything about a box. You will. Why? Because I'll wait. He sat down, right there in the snow, 15 feet from her wall. He pulled out a strip of dried meat. He began to chew. Ada did not move. She stood in her doorway, rifle across her body, and she thought fast. Because Ezra was climbing. She could hear him now, faint, below, a slower crunch than Hollis's. A man not used to mountains. She thought, if Ezra comes up here with anything, this man takes it. She thought Ezra doesn't know he's here. She thought, I have to warn him. She thought, how? She thought, how? And then, behind Hollis, in the pines, she saw something, a raven. Her raven, the one she had watched every morning for weeks. It flew low across the ridge and settled on a branch above where the trail came up. It cawed once, twice. Ezra was close. Ada breathed in. She said loudly, Mr. Reed, I need to relieve myself. He looked up, surprised. Ma'am, I've been standing here 20 minutes. I'm not a horse. Turn around. Hollis blinked, then he laughed. Once. A dry, mean laugh. Miss Whitfield, do I look like a fool? You look like something. You go where I can see you. I will not. You will. She stared at him. He stared back. She said, fine, but you turn your head or I fire this rifle straight into the trees and every man on this mountain will hear it. His jaw tightened. He thought about it. He said 10 seconds behind that pine. 10 seconds only. She said, that'll do. She walked, slowly, around the pine. The moment she was out of his line of sight, she ran. Not down the trail, sideways, along the ridge, toward the sound of Ezra's boots. She did not have 10 seconds. She had maybe 15. She had to make them count. Ezra was 30 yards below her when she found him. He was leaning against a tree, breathing hard, face pale, the oiled canvas bundle inside his coat. She grabbed his sleeve. He jumped. He almost dropped the bundle. Ada. Shh. Shh, Ezra. She pulled him behind the trunk. She whispered fast, low. There's a man up there sent by your father. He knows about the box. Ezra's eyes went wide. He whispered, Hollis. Yes. God. Give it to me. Ada. Give it to me now. He fumbled. He pulled the oiled canvas out. He pressed it into her hands. She stuffed it inside her dress, against her ribs. Beside the false deed, two secrets, now one next to the other. She said, go back down. What? Go back down. Now, fast. Don't look back. Ada, I can't just... Ezra, listen to me. She looked him straight in the eye. Your wife is pregnant. Your child needs a father, not a body on a mountain. Go home. His face crumpled. He whispered, I'm sorry. She said, I know. She said, now run. He turned. He ran, slipping, falling, rising down the trail. Ada waited until she could no longer hear him. Then she walked back to her wall, slowly, very slowly. Hollis was standing when she got there, his hand near his own rifle. He said, 10 seconds is up. She said, I'm sorry, I got sick. Sick. It's the cold, Mr. Reed. It does things to a woman. She said the word woman with a slight edge. He looked at her hard. She looked back. She said, you want to search me, Mr. Reed, for a box on my body? He did not answer. She said quietly, I didn't think so. She walked past him, into her wall. She sat down inside, rifle across her lap. Hollis stayed outside. He was thinking, hard, because he had heard the second set of boots coming up, then going down. He knew Ezra had come and left. He did not know what Ezra had left with or without. But he was not going to search a 17-year-old girl. Not on Josiah's orders, not on any orders. Even Hollis Reed had a line. He said into the wall, Miss Whitfield. She said, yes. I'll be back. She said, I'll be here. He turned. He walked down the mountain. Ada sat inside her wall. She waited until she could no longer hear him. Then she pulled the box from her dress. She held it in her lap. She whispered, Mama. She said the word twice. Then she got up. She went to the loose stone at the back of her wall, the one she had left loose on purpose, just in case. She pulled it out. She placed the ball in the hollow behind it. She replaced the stone. She sat down again. She stared at the fire. She thought, the key, Mama. Where did you put the key? She closed her eyes. She thought back. She thought back to the cabin, to her mother's kitchen, to the wooden crate under the bread shelf where the old buttons were kept, and the loose brick in the pantry floor, and the crack behind the pie safe. She thought, it's somewhere in that house. I have to go back. She thought, I have to go home. She thought, but home is not mine anymore. She opened her eyes. She said out loud, not yet, it isn't. She fed the fire. 3 days later, the storm came back. Worse than the first one because this time the temperature dropped deep. The kind of cold that cracks tree trunks like gunshots in the night. The kind of cold that freezes water in a bucket 6 feet from a burning stove. Iron Hollow began to die faster. 2 more people gone in the first night, then a third the second morning. 6 now, total. Since the winter began, the church bell rang and rang and rang. People stopped counting. They started listening for who wasn't at breakfast. Delia went to the church. She did not sit in a pew. She stood in the aisle. Reverend Fenn was at the pulpit. His voice was thin. He was reading from Job. Delia said, Obadiah. Fenn looked up. The congregation turned. She said, stop reading. He set the Bible down. She walked to the front. She said loud enough for the back row, there is a girl on that mountain who has not eaten a hot meal cooked by another human in 7 weeks, and she is warmer tonight than my grandson. Silence. She said, there is knowledge on that mountain. That could save every one of us. And we are down here, freezing to death, because we were too proud to learn from an orphan. Josiah Marlowe stood up from the second pew. Cordelia, she turned on him. Sit down. Nobody had ever spoken to Josiah Marlowe that way. He blinked. He sat. Not because he wanted to, because the entire congregation was watching. And he understood something in that moment. The room had shifted. Delia turned back to the congregation. I am going up that mountain. Reverend Fenn said, Cordelia, in this cold. I am 68 years old, Obadiah. I have been walking these hills since before most of you were born. I can make the climb. Ezra Marlowe stood up. I'll go with her. His wife stood up beside him, round with child. I'll come as far as the base. Reverend Fenn came down from the pulpit. Then I am coming too. Josiah did not stand. Josiah did not move. Josiah watched his son walk out of the church with an old woman and a reverend and did not lift a finger, because for the first time in his adult life, Josiah Marlowe understood he had lost. He didn't know how yet, he just knew. They climbed, Delia, Ezra, Reverend Fenn, 2 other men from the church. Ruth Marlowe stopped at the base wrapped in blankets against a pine watching them go up. The snow was up to their knees, in some places their hips. Delia was slow, but she did not stop. Once near the halfway point, her old legs gave out. Ezra caught her before she went down. She gripped his coat. She said, son. He said, yes, ma'am. She said, don't you dare let me die on this mountain before I see her. He said, no, ma'am. He carried her the last quarter mile, an old woman on his back, her arms around his neck, her breath warm against his ear. The reverend led with a lantern. Nobody spoke. The wind moved through the pines like a slow prayer. Ada was outside her wall gathering wood. She heard them before she saw them. Boots, Many, slow, struggling. She stepped back inside her wall. She picked up the rifle. Then she saw the lantern. Then she saw Reverend Fenn's face. Then she saw Ezra. Then she saw the woman on Ezra's back. Gray shawl, white hair spilling out from under a hood. Ada set down the rifle. She walked out of her wall. She walked out into the snow. She walked toward them. Her face broke. For the first time since she had left Iron Hollow, her face broke. Ezra knelt in the snow. Delia slid off his back into the snow. Ada dropped to her knees in front of her. Delia lifted one gloved hand. She placed it on Ada's cheek. She said, "My girl." Ada said, "You came." Delia said, "I was always coming. I was just waiting for the storm." Ada put her arms around the old woman's neck. She held on. She held on the way a child holds on, because in that moment she was a child again. For the first time in 2 years, Delia held her back. She whispered, "It's time now, it's time." They brought them all inside the wall. The hollow was small, not built for six, but they made it work. Ada added stones to the fire. She wrapped Delia in the extra blanket. She heated slate slabs and slipped them under Delia's boots. Boots. The Reverend was staring at everything. The wall, the curved stone shield behind the fire, the moss bed, the way the smoke moved. He whispered, "My God." He said it like a prayer, not a curse. Ezra sat against the far wall, not speaking. His shoulders shook once, then steadied. The two other men from the church were just staring at Ada. One of them said, "Girl, you built all this." Ada said, "Yes." He said, "How?" She said, "I listened." Delia sipped hot water from the tin cup. She looked around. She said Ruth would be so proud. Ada's eyes filled again. She sat down beside Delia. She held her hand. Delia said, "Now the box." Ada said, "I hid it. Get it." Ada rose. She went to the loose stone. She pulled it out. She took the box in her hands. She sat back down beside Delia. Delia said, "There is a key. Your mother told me she hid it. In the cabin. Do you know where?" Ada closed her eyes. She thought, and then she said quietly, "The door frame." "What?" "My father's door frame, where he cut the marks. There was a mark I never understood, between the 8-year mark and the 9-year mark. A tiny second cut. I always thought it was a slip of the knife." Delia stared at her. "It's a slot," Ada whispered, "for a key." Reverend Fenn breathed in sharply. Ezra Marlowe's head came up. Ezra said, It's in my house." Ada looked at him. She said, "It's in my house." Ezra flinched. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said, "it's in your house. I'll go get it." Ada said no. Everyone looked at her. She said, "I'll go get it." Delia said, "My girl, you can't. Not tonight. Not in this." Ada said, "Tomorrow morning, first light. The storm will break by then. I know this mountain." She looked at Ezra. "You're not going into my mother's house without me." Ezra bowed his head. He said, "Yes, ma'am." They stayed the night in the wall. All of them, wrapped together around the fire. On the moss bed, Delia fell asleep with her head on Ada's shoulder. Ada did not sleep. She stared into the fire, and she thought about her mother, about the door frame, about a tiny second cut she had touched every day for 4 years and never understood, about the fact that her father had built the hiding place, which meant her father had known. He had died before her mother got sick, which meant her parents had planned this, together. Long before anyone knew who Ada would need to become. They had trusted her. They had trusted her from the start. She pressed her hand against the cedar box. She whispered, "All right, Mama. All right, Papa." She whispered, "I'm coming home tomorrow." The next morning they came down the mountain. Delia, Ada, Ezra, Reverend Fenn, the two men. They came down slowly. Delia on Ezra's back again. Ada carrying the cedar box wrapped in oiled canvas against her ribs. At the base of the ridge, Ruth Marlowe was still there, waiting, wrapped in blankets, her breath a small cloud. When she saw them coming, she stood. When she saw Ada, she began to weep. Ada walked past her without stopping. Not cruelty, just focus. Ruth followed. They walked into Iron Hollow at mid-morning. The town saw them coming. People stepped out of doorways. They stood in the road. They said nothing. Ada walked at the front. Delia beside her now walking on her own again. Ezra behind them. The Reverend behind him. Ada did not stop. She walked straight to her mother's cabin. Her old cabin. Ezra's now. She stopped at the door. She looked at Ezra. He said, "Please go in." She opened the door. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first. The old cedar, the apples, still there. She went to the door frame. She placed her fingers on the marks. She found it, the tiny second cut, between the 8 and the 9. She pulled the false deed from her dress. She used the corner of the paper to pry the tiny cut open. A slit in the wood, a hollow the length of her finger, inside, a small brass key. She lifted it out. She held it up in the light. She whispered, "Papa." She turned. Delia was standing behind her, the Reverend beside her, Ezra behind them. Ada walked to the kitchen table. She set the cedar box on it. She fitted the key. It turned. The box opened. Inside was a small leather-bound book. Ada took it out. She opened it to the first page. Her mother's handwriting. Neat, small, careful. The first line read, "If you are reading this, Cordelia has given you this book, which means I have been gone a long time, and you have become the woman I always knew you would be." Ada could not read further, not aloud. She handed it to the Reverend. He read, slowly. Every entry, every date, every visit from Josiah Marlowe, every attempted pressure, every refused signature. The names of the 2 other women in town Josiah had also visited. The elderly widow McCoy, who had signed away her Southfield under pressure and died 3 months later. The widow Halverson, who had refused and been found frozen in her doorway the following winter. The Reverend's face went gray. He said, "This is not one crime, Ada." Ada said, "I know." He said, "This is years of them." She said, "I know." He looked up from the book. He said, "We are going to the church right now, and I am going to read this to every person in Iron Hollow." Ada said, "No." Everyone looked at her. She said, "Not yet." She said, "First, my village is dying. 6 people are dead already. I did not walk down this mountain to give a speech." She said, "I came down to teach them how to live." Delia stared at her. Then Delia smiled. Slowly, widely, a smile like a sunrise. She said, "There she is. There is Ruth's daughter." For 3 days, Ada worked. She barely slept. She barely ate. She went house to house. She showed them the moss under the beds, the heated slate stones in the coals, the curved stone shield behind the fire to reflect heat back, the narrowing of doorways to break the wind, the stacking of pine boughs against the north walls to trap air. She was patient with the old women. She was firm with the men who muttered. One farmer, a man named Bellamy, said, "I ain't taking directions from a 17-year-old girl." Delia stepped forward. Delia said, "Then you'll be taking directions from your maker soon. Get your slate stones." He got his slate stones. Hollis Reed disappeared from Iron Hollow the same day Delia walked into the church. Nobody saw him go. His horse was gone from Josiah's barn. His small room over the feed store was cleaned out. Some said he rode east. Some said he rode south. Nobody looked for him, because everybody understood without saying it that whatever had happened between him and Josiah Marlowe had ended when Delia stood up in the aisle. Hollis Reed was smart enough to leave before the tide came in. Josiah did not come out of his house. He watched from his window. He watched Ada Whitfield walk in and out of every home in Iron Hollow. He watched his son carry firewood behind her. He watched Reverend Fenn nod respectfully to her at the crossroads. He watched the way people looked at her. He watched the way people looked at him. Nobody came to his door. Not one person came to his door. She was 58. He was the wealthiest man in Iron Hollow. He owned 300 head of cattle. He had built the church with his own money, and no one came to his door. His stove burned low. He did not add wood. He was rationing. He had told himself he did not need her methods. By the second night, his hands began to shake from the cold. By the third night, he could not feel his feet. He sat in his fine leather chair, wrapped in his fine wool blanket, staring at his fine oil painting of his own father on the wall. He whispered, "I will not ask her." He whispered it 3 times, because he had to, because part of him was already asking. On the 4th morning, Ruth Marlowe found him. She had come with hot broth. She had knocked. He had not answered. She had come in anyway. He was still in the chair. His eyes were open. His breath was very shallow. She dropped the broth. It spilled across the rug. She ran. She ran to Ada. She grabbed Ada's arm on the church steps. She said, "Please." Ada looked at her. Ada thought, "Let him die." Ada thought it fully, clearly, not for a second, for a long moment. Then Ada looked at Ruth Marlowe's belly. at the child inside it, who had done nothing. Ada said, "Take me to him." She sat down beside Josiah's chair. She did not touch him. She said, "Mr. Marlowe." He turned his head, slowly, his eyes focused on her. He said, "You." She said, "Me." He said, "You have come to watch me die." "No, then why?" "Because your daughter-in-law asked me." He tried to laugh. It came out a rasp. He said, "You should let me freeze." She said, "Yes." He blinked. She said, "But I won't." Silence. She said, "I am going to warm this house, and I am going to feed you broth, and you are going to live long enough to hear what I have to say." She stood up. She built the fire. She heated stones. She wrapped him in a second blanket. She fed him broth by the spoonful. Warm, slow. The color came back into his face by evening. He did not thank her. Once. She did not want him to. That night, she sat across from him. The fire was strong, the stones were warm under his chair. She placed the leather-bound book on the small table between them. She said, "Do you know what this is?" He looked at it. His face did not change. He said, "Yes." She said, "Your name is in this, many times in my mother's own hand." He said nothing. She said, "I could take this to the county sheriff in Laramie, my mother's book, plus the false deed you had prepared 8 months before she died, plus the testimony of Cordelia Ashford, plus the testimony of Reverend Fenn, plus I imagine the testimony of your own son." Still nothing. She said, "You would spend the rest of your life in a prison." He turned his head. He looked at her. She said, "That is not what I am going to do." His eyes narrowed. She said, "You are going to sign the cabin back to me, fully, in writing before Reverend Fenn as witness, tomorrow morning. That's all." "No," she leaned forward. "You are also going to sign over the West Pasture, the one you took from Widow McCoy before she died. To her surviving nephew, who lives in Cheyenne, I have his address." Josiah's face went still. She said, "And the Halverson land, to the church, in perpetuity, for any family in Iron Hollow who cannot afford shelter." She said, "And you are going to stand up in that church on Sunday, and you are going to say to everyone what you did." Silence. Long silence. Josiah closed his eyes. He said, "And if I refuse," she said, "then this book goes to Laramie tomorrow morning." Long silence. Then Josiah said very quietly, "Girl." She said, "Yes." He said, "You are your mother's daughter." She said, "I know." He signed everything the next morning. He stood in the church that Sunday. He was pale. He had lost 15 pounds in a week. He did not weep. He did not beg. He was still Josiah Marlowe. But he said the words. He said, "I forced Ruth Whitfield. I forced others. I did it because I could. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I do not ask for it." He sat down. Reverend Fenn stood. He said, "This community has done wrong, not just one man, all of us. We knew what kind of man Josiah Marlowe was, and we let him lead us, because it was easy." He looked at Ada. He said, "Miss Whitfield, we do not deserve you, but you came down that mountain anyway." Ada stood. She said, "I did not come down for you." She said, "I came down for the ones who had not yet died." She said, "That is all I have to say." She sat down. The whole church was still. Then one by one people rose. Not all at once, not a crowd, not a wave, one at a time. The Reverend came first, bowed his head to her. Then old Mr. Bellamy, the farmer who had grumbled, bowed his head. Then a woman named Harris. Then a young man. Then a widow. Ada sat in the pew. Her eyes stayed dry, but her jaw trembled. She let them come. Delia sat beside her, her old hand on Ada's arm. When it was over, Delia whispered, "Your mother is watching my girl." Ada whispered, "I know." Josiah Marlowe died the following month. Not from the cold, from something else. His heart, the doctor said. Or maybe his pride finally caught up to him. He left everything to Ezra, except for one clause, written in his own hand, 2 days before his death. "A portion of my land on the eastern face of Broken Ridge shall be held in trust in perpetuity for the construction and maintenance of stone shelters, to be built according to the methods of Ada Whitfield, free of charge for any traveler or resident of this valley who requires refuge from the winter." He did not apologize in the will, but he did that, which for Josiah Marlowe was as close to sorrow as he could come. Spring came slowly to Iron Hollow. The snow retreated first from the south-facing slopes. The creek found its voice. Grass pushed through the mud. Ada moved back into her mother's cabin. She added a new mark on the doorframe. 17. Delia moved in with her. She brought her knitting and her old iron kettle and her memories of Ruth. They sat together in the evenings. Delia taught Ada more complicated patterns. Ada taught Delia to read the newspaper better because Delia had never had proper schooling. Sometimes they talked about Ruth. Sometimes they just sat. The little cabin held warm light in its windows again. Ezra and Ruth Marlowe moved to a small house at the western edge of town. Their child was born in April, a girl. They named her Cordelia. They asked Delia to be godmother. She said yes. She wept when she said it. Wesley Kirby, 11 years old, came to Ada's door one morning in May. He had his hands in his pockets. He said, "Miss Whitfield." She said, "Wes." He said, "My ma, she lived through the winter because of your stones." She said, "I know." He said, "I want to learn how to build them. So no other kid in this town has to go without a big sister the way you did." Ada was very still because nobody had ever said it to her like that. Nobody had ever seen it that way, that she was in some strange way. Everyone's missing the older sister now. She knelt. She looked at him, really looked. She said, "All right, Wes." She said, "We start tomorrow." He nodded once, solemn, then ran off down the road kicking mud. The seasons turned, then turned again. 10 winters in the way seasons pile onto each other in a small mountain town. Babies became children. Children became young men and women. Old people slipped away in their sleep one by one in warm rooms. Not one of them lost to the cold, not one. One evening in late fall of the 10th year, Ada climbed Broken Ridge alone. She did it every year, in the anniversary of the day she had left. The trail was easier now. It was well worn. Families had put small stone shelters at the halfway point and at the top. She was 27. She had not married. She had never wanted to. She lived in her mother's cabin. She kept sheep. She sold wool. She taught the older children reading in the winter months. She was quietly the most respected person in Iron Hollow. Nobody called her that. Nobody had to. Wesley Kirby was 21 now. He had grown tall. He was the one who taught the new families how to build their Whitfield shelters. He was patient with them. He never let anyone leave a build unfinished. Delia was 78. Her back was bent now, but she still walked to the store on her own 2 feet. That evening, as Ada left for the mountain, Delia had said from the porch, "Give the wall, my love, my girl." Ada had smiled. "I will." She reached her old hollow at sunset. The wall was still there. Weather had softened its edges. Moss had grown over the base stones, but it stood. She sat down against it. She placed her hand on the highest stone, the stone she had added the day the wall first held. She closed her eyes. She said, "Hi, Papa." She said, "Hi, Mama." She said, "The girl came out all right." She sat for a long time. The sun went down behind the ridge. The stars came out. The pines whispered. Below in the valley, small lights came on in the windows of Iron Hollow. Every one of those windows was warm. She whispered, "Thank you, mountain." The wind rose. It struck the stone wall. It climbed. It slipped over the top. It went out into the sky. The wall held. It always would. Some winters kill. Some winters teach. Ada Whitfield did not defeat the winter of 1889. She listened to it. And an old woman named Cordelia Ashford, who guarded a cedar box for 2 years, waiting for the right storm, taught a whole town a bigger lesson. Truth needs the right season, but truth should never stay buried forever. The next time a stranger stands at the edge of your life, alone, carrying only what she can hold, look at her hands, because sometimes the person you send away is the only one who knows how to save you.